This happened a couple of years ago when I was backpacking in Australia. I traveled around driving a van, like many backpackers there do, as it saves a lot of money with accommodations. I usually slept in rest areas, gas stations, or wherever I could park. This one night, I'd been driving for a few hours and started to feel sleepy. I decided then to stop in the next rest area, in the middle of nowhere. Parking in that location during daytime could be a great idea, but at night it seemed like a horror movie location. There were no cars parked there. I know I should park where there were more people around, but I was really drowsy, and no lights whatsoever. I turned off the engine and closed the curtains of the van. It was not long before dawn that I heard some heavy knocking on the side of the van. "Open up, it's the police." Nothing wakes you up faster than that. My heart was racing. I was just adjusting to the adrenaline rush in my system when they repeated the heavy knocking, saying it was the police. My first thought is that I parked somewhere I shouldn't. But then again, it was the middle of nowhere and it was a rest area. Before opening up, with my mind telling me that the situation was weird, I decided to go slowly to one of the windows and look through the gap in one of the curtains. I could clearly see the shape or shadow of a guy standing beside the van. His car wasn't too far, but it didn't have any lights or flashing lights on. This guy was definitely not a cop. Bringing up the courage I had left, I just shouted, "Go away. I have a gun and I'm calling the cops on the radio." I didn't have a radio or a gun, but that seemed to faze him. I saw him getting back on his car. And to add to the creepiness, someone came out of the bushes and also got in the car. They left, and a few minutes after that, I turned on my van and drove in the opposite direction they went to. Safe to say that I never slept in another rest area that didn't have at least a couple other cars parked. I don't know what those people wanted, but with Australia's history of backpackers serial killers, I'm very happy to be here today. This happened 24 years ago in July of 1996. I had finished my term of service for the Army and decided at midnight I would out-process and travel. All day I was so anxious to go that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 11 p.m., I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited and waited, and finally at 2 a.m. he returned. I turned my key in, got the sign-off, and at 3 a.m. I was on my way. At first I was so full of adrenaline that I felt I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was nodding off. I decided that I would pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came up to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air and throw something away and to get a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was a picnic stop and not a rest stop, so no restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a poster of a few missing persons, but I really didn't pay any attention to it. I went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows and turned on the boombox I had for some tunes and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake just slightly. I cracked an eye open and looked and didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. I then heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratching on the door key. I then sat up quickly, but I didn't see anyone there. I looked at all the windows and didn't see anyone, so again I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down and turned up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired I just laid back down. A few more minutes later, I heard the door handle again and car really shook. I sat up quickly and saw a man standing at the passenger side looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't see his face. Being young and dumb and just out of the military, I yelled at him. He just stared at me. So like an idiot, I got out of the car. He just walked off towards the picnic tables, like nothing happened. All the while I'm yelling at him that if he came back, I would take him out. I decided I would just drive on from there. I got back in and went on my way. Even though I was so upset only about 10 miles down the road, I was super tired again. Luckily, about another 10 miles down, there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but they don't. I pulled into the second picnic stop and backed into a spot just in case I needed to leave quickly. Not sure why, but there was only one other car there and no semi-trucks. I again locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later I hear a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around and no one was there. I got out of the car, which was very stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going, but no one was around. I assumed it was my nerves from the other stop. I got back into my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes. This time I was too hot up to fall asleep, so I laid there with my eyes closed. I felt that someone was looking at me, and I opened my eyes and saw the guy standing there again with the red sweatshirt. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see he was smiling at me. I popped up quick and tried to quickly open the door and bump him. Being a cheap Geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open. He walked backwards, still staring at me. By the time I got out, he was about 30 feet away, facing me. It was fairly dark, but as I looked him over, he looked real skinny. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. I could see something shine every now and then as he stood there staring at me. I believe it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat and started yelling at him to come get some. He started walking towards me, and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking, as I got about 5 feet from my car and he was now about 15 feet from me. A yellow van pulled up real quick and parked just off to the side of my car. I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw two guys also wearing hooded sweatshirts in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I had left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut it hard right and peeled my car out of there. I was so lucky being a manual car, I didn't stall the car because the other two guys were out of the van, and the first guy was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I stopped for gas and to use the restroom. In the restroom, I noticed that same poster I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was basically a poster with several missing persons on it, and warning people not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being possibly 6 foot, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I completely went white. Needless to say, since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the wide awake. Not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the poster or told anyone about it. But I now live in North Texas and pass those 2 picnic stops every day on my way to work. And I think about it quite often. I wonder if they got anyone else or if they caught them. I tried looking it up, but I don't find any stories about it on the internet. At the time of this story was early 2000. I was going to college in South Florida and lived with my family in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to get between the 2 places, so I mostly only went home for the holidays. It was the Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was excited that I'd managed to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave campus 3 days ahead of everyone else. I was expecting to beat the masses of traffic and was hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates wanted to have a last meal together before we all left for break, so I ate in the campus dining hall around 4 p.m., and I set off on my journey around 5, almost 6 p.m. Around 10 p.m., I just passed my 2 per 3 mark, where I always stopped at this little mom-and-pop's type of diner by the side of the highway to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay. I didn't have a cell phone yet. Well, I hadn't been there since summer and the place was out of business. So, a little bummed out that I wasn't getting my chocolate chip pancakes, I just kept going. There really wasn't much built up around there at that time, so when I saw signs for a rest stop, and of all the places in middle of nowhere, I went for it. So I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety, and used the facilities, called my dad, etc. I didn't see anyone else there except for a very exhausted-looking woman who approached me asking for directions, saying she was with her husband and 2 small children from Virginia, and they had made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. So I left the rest area and was walking back to my car when I noticed a beat-up, unmarked, gray or blue work van parked real close to the driver's side of my '95 Honda Civic. I thought that's pretty weird. It had Florida tags on it, so it couldn't have been the ladies I talked to in the bathroom. I distinctly remembered she said she was from Virginia. I turned around and hightailed it back to the rest stop, promptly running into some random middle-aged guy with 2 little boys. Getting talked to him, it turned out it was his wife I had spoken to, as she also emerged from the bathroom a second later, and I felt comfortable speaking to him. I told him what was going on with the van and how I didn't know what to do. He said he'd go check it out, so he left the kids with his wife and go up to the driver's side of this van. He stood there for a moment before speaking. We could hear him yell it from where we're standing, some 100 feet away. "Excuse me, gentlemen, we already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest that you get out of here." And then he ran back to us, grabbed his wife and his kids, pointed to me with a swift U, and said, "Come on, let's all get in the car now." And we ran together. So here I was, confusedly sitting in the back of this stranger's SUV, while he went and used the payphone to call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of there, like, I've never seen someone get the hell out of there, quite like, they have to got the hell out of there. They ran up on the curb on their way out. The cops got there, and I found out what happened. The man went to go check out the van, and he could see in it pretty well because I had parked under the streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all of the seats, except for the driver's seat, had been removed. There was a guy sitting in the driver's seat, and a guy sitting in the back. A tarp laid out in the back, and a bunch of other random items back there he couldn't immediately identify. Neither of the guys were reading a newspaper or a map or anything. They were apparently both just sitting there. It still makes me sick thinking about it.